Okay, we're going to continue on in the Apocrypha. This is the book of Judith, chapter 4, verse 4. So they sent into all the borders of Samaria, and to Cona, and to Beth Horon, and Bel Remain, and Jericho, and to Chobia, and to Assorah, and the valley of Salem, and occupied in advance all the summits of the high mountains and fortified villages that were on them, and stored up food in preparation for war, for their fields had been lately been reaped. And Joachim the high priest, who was in Jerusalem at the time, wrote to the inhabitants of Bethulia and Beth Mesophim, which is opposite of Esdraelon, facing the plain near Dothan, telling them to seize the passes of the mountains, because through them Judea could be entered, and it was an easy way to prevent any from approaching, as the way was narrow with room for 2 men at most. So the Israelites did as they were ordered by Joachim, the high priest, and the council for all the people of Israel who live in Jerusalem. And every man of Israel cried to God with great earnestness, and they humbled themselves with great sincerity, they and their wives and their children and their cattle, and every visitor and hired man and slave put sackcloths on their loins. And every man and every woman of Israel who lived in Jerusalem with their children fell down before the temple, and threw ashes on their heads, and spread out their sackcloth before the Lord. And they covered the altar with sackcloth, and cried earnestly in concert to the God of Israel, praying that he would not permit their children to be plundered, and their wives to be pillaged, and the cities that they inherited to be destroyed, and the sanctuary to be profaned and reviled, to the delight of the heathen. Then the Lord heard their voice and regarded their affliction. The people continued to fast for several days all over Judea and Jerusalem before the sanctuary of the Lord Almighty. And Joachim, the high priest, and all the priests who officiated before the Lord and ministered to the Lord offered the continual burnt offering and the vows and the freewill offering of the people, with sackcloth upon their loins and ashes under their mitres. And they cried to the Lord with all their might, to look with favor upon all of the house of Israel. Then Holofernes, the commander-in-chief of the Assyrian army, was told that the Israelites had prepared for war, and had closed the mountain passes, and fortified every mountain top, and put barricades in the level country. And he was exceedingly angry. And he summoned up all the princes of Moab, and the generals of Ammon, and all the governors of the seacoast, and said to them, Tell me, you Canaanites, what is this people that occupies the mountain country? And what cities do they inhabit? How large is their army? And in what does their power or strength lie? What king has risen over them as the leader of their army? And why have they alone, of all the inhabitants of the west, refused to come and meet me? Then Achior, the commander of all the Amorites, and said to him, Now let my lord hear what is said by the mouth of your servant, and I will tell you the truth about this nation which inhabits this mountain region near you. Nothing false shall proceed from your servant's mouth. This nation is descended from the Chaldeans. In former times they lived for a while in Mesopotamia, because they would not follow the gods of their forefathers who were in the country of the Chaldeans. But they left the ways of their ancestors and worshiped the God of heaven, a God whom they had come to know, and their parents drove them out from the presence of their gods. And they fled to Mesopotamia and lived there for a long time. Then their God told them to leave the place where they were living and go to the land of Canaan. So they settled there and grew rich in gold and silver and very many cattle. Then they went down into Egypt, for a famine spread over the face of the land of Canaan. And they stayed there until they were grown up. There they became a great multitude. Their nation could not be counted. The king of Egypt took measures against them and took advantage of them, making them work at making bricks. They degraded them and made them slaves. Then they cried to their God, and he afflicted all the land of Egypt with incurable plagues, and the Egyptians drove them out from among them. God made the Red Sea dry up before them, and he set them on the road to Sinai and Kadesh Barnea, and they drove out all the inhabitants of the desert and lived in the country of the Amorites. And they were so strong that they destroyed all the people of Heshbon. And they crossed the Jordan and took possession of all the mountain regions. They drove out before the Canaanite and the Perizzite and the Jebusite and the Shechem and all the Gershites, and they settled there for a long time, as long as they did not sin against their God. They prospered, for God, who hates wrongdoing, was with them. But when they abandoned the way he had determined for them, they were utterly destroyed through many wars and carried off as captives to a country that was not their own. And the temple of their God was leveled to the ground, and their cities were taken by their enemies. Now they have turned to their God and have come back from their disparition that they have suffered, and they have taken possession of Jerusalem where the sanctuary is, and they have settled in the mountain region, for it was unoccupied. Now, your majesty, if there is any fault of ignorance in this nation, and they are sinning against their God, and we perceive that they are guilty of this offense, then we can go up and defeat them. But if there is no disobedience to the law in their nation, then my Lord must pass by them, or their Lord will protect them, and their God defend them, and we shall be disgraced in the eyes of the whole earth. When Achior finished saying all these things, all the people who stood around about the tent objected, and the officers of Holofernes and all the inhabitants of the seacoast and of Moab advised putting him to death. For they said, as we must not be afraid of the Israelites, for behold, they are a people with no strength or might in real warfare. So now we must advance, and they will be devoured by all your army, Lord Holofernes. When the disturbance made by the men around the council had ceased, Holofernes, the commander-in-chief of the Assyrian army, said to Achior and all the Moabites before all the body of heathen, and who are you, Achior, and your mercenaries of Ephraim, that you should act the prophet among us as you have today, and tell us not to make war upon the people of Israel, because their God will protect them? What God is there except Nebuchadnezzar? He will put forth his strength and destroy them off the face of the earth, and their God will not save them. But we who are his slaves will strike them down as one man, and they will not withstand the might of our horses. For with them we will consume them, and their mountains will be drunk with their blood, and their plains will be filled with their dead bodies. The track of their feet will not stand before us, but they will utterly perish, says King Nebuchadnezzar, the Lord of the whole earth. For he said the words he had spoken would not be in vain. But you, Achior, your hiring of Ammon, who have said that these things in the time of your iniquity, you shall not see my face again from this day until I take vengeance on the nation of those that came out of Egypt. Then the sword of my army and my host of servants